Good afternoon and welcome to eCampus Ontario's special Lunch and Learn webinar, Building a Productive Economy and Workforce Through Enterprise-Driven Talent Development. My name is Michael Krobach and I'll be your host for today. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be published online via our YouTube channel in early April. Today's session continues an important discussion on talent development from our in-person February forum. We're delighted that you've chosen to spend your afternoon with us today. I'd like to begin this webinar with a land acknowledgement. I'm hosting this session from my home in Toronto, Ontario. As a settler of Polish, Austrian, and Croatian descent, I'm grateful to have the privilege to learn and live on this traditional territory. I recognize that this is a virtual space and you may be joining us from different lands. If you're a settler, I encourage you to take some time out of your day to reflect on the land you're on and your relationship to traditional lands. We invite you to use the chat window to share where you're joining us from today. eCampus Ontario is a not-for-profit membership-based organization funded by the Ministry of Colleges and Universities. We convene the entirety of the public post-secondary education sector, representing all publicly assisted universities, colleges, and Indigenous institutes in the province. We work to build digital by design educator, learner, and employer-centric experiences. We play a critical role in championing and advancing digital participation in post-secondary education, helping to grow the economy and sustain the sector by connecting post-secondary institutions and students to the future of learning and the future of work. We lead in the research, development, and sharing of exemplary practices in online and tech-enabled learning, and support employers and institutions in fostering innovation, collaboration, and excellence on behalf of students and faculty. I'm very pleased to introduce Dave Flynn, Director of Business Networks at Skillnet Ireland. Dave is responsible for national, industry, and regional talent initiatives that advance business productivity and innovation. Working closely with partners in industry, education, and government, Dave oversees the delivery of Skillnet Business Networks, which address the skills and talent needs of over 26,000 businesses in Ireland each year. Please join me in welcoming Dave, and Dave, over to you. Oh, you're on mute, Dave.
Thank you, Michael. You might just let me know if you can hear me.
Now I'm on mute, yes.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. And I'll just start the slideshow here. So good afternoon, everybody. And thank you very much, Michael, for the introduction. Folks, what I'm hoping to do for the next half an hour or so is just to give you a little bit of background information about Skillnet Ireland, why our organization was first set up, and what we're hoping to achieve and what we have achieved over the years and our ambitions as an organization. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we support businesses and those clusters of businesses that we call Skillnet Business Networks. I'm going to give you a little bit of a flavor of the funding programs that we design in a way that we hope is attractive to industry, that elicits demand from companies to upskill their staff throughout Ireland. Finally, I'm going to touch on just our national talent initiatives. So over and above the clusters of companies that we support, there are some big challenges and big opportunities in Ireland, and I'm sure in Ontario and in Canada more broadly, around digitalization, climate, and so on. And these are areas that need additional focus. And there's certainly policy priorities from an Irish government perspective, and they've asked us to do and establish bespoke initiatives around these policy areas, which we do through these national talent initiatives. And I'll give you just a little bit of, as I say, a flavour of that later. And for sure, folks, towards the end of the session, then there'll be an opportunity for Q&A if anybody has any questions. And I think that Michael and Latvia will coordinate that for us, which is great. So folks, just firstly then, so just a little bit about Skillnet Ireland. So who are we? We're a national organisation, national agency, and we were established in 1999, celebrating our 25th anniversary just towards the end of last year. So we were delighted to make that big milestone. And really the reason that we were established is that when you look back into the tail end of the last century in 1999, companies in Ireland were saying to the Irish government that what was there at that point in time in terms of opportunities to upskill and develop their staff, that the existing provision just wasn't sufficiently responsive or relevant to the needs of business. What was there was maybe state-driven or potentially provider-driven, but there needed to be a little bit more of a focus from an enterprise-driven perspective, and we were established on a pilot basis at that stage, and thankfully we're still here. So yeah, so I suppose the key rationale for establishing this was to establish and address that enterprise need, but beyond that, then to try and make sure that we could help companies in Ireland to be more productive, more competitive, more innovative in what they do, through a focus on their people, through focus on skills and talent development. So we're very much an enterprise-driven agency, and I'll talk to you about how that manifests itself and how it works its way through the organization over the course of the presentation. But we're also coordinating in a convening body. We're trying to bring together government actors, policymakers, the further and higher education sector, and businesses throughout Ireland. And through that mechanism, through that model that we use. And I think that is very much aligned then when I hear Michael giving an overview of eCampus Ontario, of some of your own work folks and some of the key things that drive your organizations. So we support not just individual companies, but entire groups of companies and industries and regions across Ireland as well. So there's a regional development component to what we do. And I suppose ultimately trying to make sure that companies have the talent that they need to thrive. So you're addressing talent gaps that exist in the country at the moment, but you're also working with businesses and trying to anticipate, what those needs are going to be in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, so that you can develop that set or suite of programs or offerings that help to address those future skills needs as well, and getting that balance between the two of the current and future needs. So we were established, as I say, back in '99, but we're established as actually a company by the government at that point in time. And that is still the case. Skillnet Ireland is a company, a CLG, albeit that we're also a public body and we're fully funded. We have our own board and so on. And I suppose that was an important aspect in terms of how we do our work, because it gives us that level of flexibility and responsiveness in terms of how we can react to the needs of business. And we're funded through what is called the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research and Innovation and Science in Ireland, which supports the higher education sectors, as the name suggests. And that funding from the department comes from what's called the National Training Fund. So that's a levy on employers in Ireland, which is collected through social insurance contributions and so on. So it means that the private sector is actually contributing very hugely or very significantly to the work of Skillnet Ireland and other agencies through that national levy, as I've mentioned. So if we think then about our maybe our strategic growth areas and the areas that we put a lot of focus on, as I say, we're very much enterprise driven. What we do is driven by the needs of companies, but yet we're also trying to kind of balance that with some of the bigger needs within Ireland from the point of view of economic development, Ireland's sustainability, and so on. So there's a core focus for us in the current strategy period. We're going to be renewing our statement of strategy later this year. But I suppose that the key areas of focus for us over the last 4 years or so have been digitalization. So lots of individuals, of course, needing to be upskilled in core digital skills, etc., in Ireland as in other countries. I suppose our main focus has been in the area of the digital transformation of businesses. So giving businesses those capabilities and knowledge to utilize digital technologies to a much greater extent than they are at the moment. And that can be from maybe technologies that have been, used for years, if not decades at this stage, which is still a challenge for maybe a number of SMEs in Ireland, right through to advanced technologies and emerging technologies around AI, quantum, and so on. Climate agenda, folks, I'm sure is, as equally important for yourselves. From Skillnet Ireland's perspective, the way that we try and focus our support from a climate perspective, again, is ensuring that businesses in Ireland are working sustainably. So focus on making sure then the management teams understand what that means, how they can make their business more sustainable, what are their climate action plans and sustainability plans, etc. What skills do they need as owners and managers? What skills do their workers need to be able to act more sustainably, not just now and into the future? Third key area for us is around SME management development. So this is looking at the capability of the people running small and medium-sized enterprises in Ireland, and they're the backbone of the Irish economy. They employ a huge amount of people. The vast majority of people in Ireland are employed in SMEs, and yet through different research publications over the years, productivity challenges within SMEs has been challenged or has been highlighted. And I suppose for us as an organization, we say, well, look at how can we make the biggest difference there? And one of the key ways that we can do that is helping with the capability skills of those people who are owning and managing those SME businesses. And the fourth area is just around FDI, foreign direct investment. Ireland is fortunate to have a number of companies who've established themselves in the country over the years in medtech, pharma, financial services, and so on. And these are high value jobs and very important to the Irish economy. So we need to make sure that the people who are in those jobs and performing those roles, as always, have the key skills they need for their businesses. So I suppose there are kind of key priorities, but over and above that, then there's always scope and there's always a focus on just the key skills that a particular industry might need. So, for example, we support the private healthcare sector, a group of companies operating in that sector in Ireland. And one of the key programs they deliver is healthcare support training for people who are working as healthcare assistants. So that isn't necessarily an area that speaks to digitalization or to climate, but it's really important from an Irish community perspective because we have an aging population and we have a skills gap. Not enough people want to go into those caring roles. So for sure, Skillnet Ireland puts a focus on those industry-specific skills, whether it's healthcare or the food and drink industry, whether it's engineering sector, et cetera, et cetera. There will always be a role for that industry piece, and we try and get that balance right in as much as we can. So how we work then, we're an agency tasked with workforce development in Ireland, and yet we don't deliver education or training directly. What we have done right from the outset back in 1999 is to identify key industry partners that we can work with who know their sector or know their region well. And Ireland is very fortunate to have a number of very mature and well-established industry groups and bodies. We work with approximately 60 of those each year, and those bodies bring a huge amount of insight and intel in terms of what's happening within their sector or their region, and what's likely to be coming down the tracks in those regions. And they also have access to membership bases of companies as well. So by working with so many partners, it helps us to scale as an organization in terms of the overall numbers of people that we support. And as Michael mentioned just in his introductory piece, it's through that decentralized model, through that partnership model that allows us to work with over 26,000 businesses and close to now 100,000 workers each year. So those sectors, we could be working with maybe just a single industry body for a sector, or where there's a sector where that has a huge concentration of companies in Ireland, like the tech sector, for example, or the agri-food sector. We could be working with anywhere between 5 and 10 industry groups in those sectors to try and support them, albeit that they'll have a different offering or a different membership base and so on. But those partners bodies are the key to our success. And typically what we do when we identify an industry partner to work with is not just to provide funding and support, and I'll talk about the model in a little minute, but it's to enter into a true partnership where you see yourself working with this group, not just for the next year or 2 or 3 years, but for many, many years, because the needs of those companies are going to continue to evolve. So some of the industry groups that we've that are listed there and others we worked with right back from the time that we were first established, like in the retail sector in Ireland. We've worked with Retail Ireland, the industry body for the retail sector, which employs over 300,000 people in the country. We've worked with that retail industry group, right back from the year that we were first established ourselves. And then others then will join us over the years. We typically open up opportunities through what we call calls for proposals for new groups, to come into Skillnet Ireland and avail of funding support, so that their companies get to upskill and they get to develop their staff. So I suppose maybe what will I say here, just in terms of that partnership approach, as I say, gives a scale. It means we can support a much greater proportion of people. But I'm mindful of, and people I'm sure will have seen this, the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report published in January. It talked about the fact that skills gaps are now the biggest blocker to business transformation globally. So, even though we've reached a certain scale, we know we need to go even further. We need to support an even greater proportion of companies to upskill their staff in Ireland. Another key part of what we do is the cost sharing piece. So, as I mentioned, we're funded by the Department of Further and Higher Education in Ireland, but we would cost share. In other words, companies who are participating in the education and training programs delivered under a Skillnet banner would also invest in those programs through course fees and program fees. And in fact, that's a very significant amount of investment that helps to deliver an even greater proportion of training and education programs. Over the last couple of years, companies are investing upwards of 30 million euro into Skillnet supported programs, which is the highest level of investment actually we've ever received from the private sector. And I suppose for us, in addition to allowing more programs to be delivered, which is great from the point of view of effectiveness and efficiency, but for us, that contribution is a great indicator of the quality of what our Skillnet networks deliver. So companies are smart if they're not getting what they need, if what is being delivered isn't talking to their specific needs, well, they might undertake a program, but they won't come back. But when you see them coming back and continually investing, and then those investment levels rising to upwards of 30 million euro now each year, it's a good sign of the quality of what our networks are delivering on behalf of businesses and so on. So I suppose a key part of it in terms of the approach is to try and facilitate and develop a model where companies get to take the lead. So where groups of companies come together to say, well, actually, these are collectively the groups of needs that we see across our set of businesses. So how do we go about addressing those needs? How do we design a program offering that meets, what is being delivered, when it's being delivered, how it's delivered, etc. The idea behind the Skillnet model is to put companies in the driving seat for all of that. So I've mentioned the word networks a couple of times, but just to give you a little bit of an overview of how we support those networks throughout Ireland. So we support 70 sectoral and regional networks, and typically they're broken down into two types, as the name suggests. The regional networks will cover a certain region in Ireland, whether it's the Northwest and so on, and they will cater to a very mixed group of companies. So all of the companies in that particular area of the country can be supported through that network, that Skillnet business network. And that could be anything from finance, services, medtech, you name it, can be part of the mix, tourism, hospitality, etc., etc. So that the Skillnet networks in those regional areas would develop maybe an offering that crosses over those different sectoral business associations or business groups, and therefore the offering tends to be a little bit more general. So it could be project management development skills, professional skills, etc., which is very much needed by those businesses. Within our sectoral networks, then they typically are concentrations of companies who are within that one sector, that one industry, and then by virtue of that, they tend to specialize in more technical programs and more specialized programs, etc. And those programs can be anything from short, sharp training interventions right through to master's programs, and I'll chat about that in a little while. And on those groups of networks, those groups of companies that I mentioned, they can be small or large. Some sectors in Ireland, for example, are small. I'm thinking about the independent radio sector that might have 50 radio stations in Ireland, and it has its own Skillnet network. And then you have some of our agribusiness and our technology networks where they might have, maybe 500 or more member companies that participate in it. And a member company is a member by virtue of upskilling its staff, through that network. It's not the case that it's a very fixed membership. We're trying to encourage as many companies as possible into each of the networks that we support. So that's a very dynamic, evolving group of companies that come in and through those networks. And some businesses are part of more than one network. They might get some of the more generic supports or general supports from a regional network around supervisory skills, etc., and then go to the specialist network for their sector for those more, as I say, specialized skills. I know that this is a busy looking slide, folks, and look, apologies in advance, but I think it might be no harm just to talk about the model a little bit and get into the detail of it, just to give you a sense of what I really mean. So on the left-hand side there, you have Skillnet Ireland, the agency that I work for. And I suppose we play a key role in providing that direction and strategic perspective, and the design of funding programs then that we hope address the needs of business. And there's an entire governance and policy framework piece that's built into that. But then the heart of what we do in terms of what gets delivered is done by those industry groups that I mentioned, who take on that legal responsibility for hosting a Skillnet network within their sectoral body, for creating a steering group, which is a group of companies who are representative of that, either that sector or that region. And they also will work to appoint the Skillnet Business Network Management Team and the network manager in the first instance. And those steering groups, as I mentioned, they provide a key governance function to each network that they're part of. And, they would hear about the expenditures and the overall activities of the network, etc. But I guess an equally important part of what they do then is to provide guidance to the management team around the future needs for companies in that region or in that sector. And they'll typically meet maybe somewhere between 4 to 6 times a year, and they give of their time voluntarily. These are business owners or maybe senior people in larger organizations who will make that contribution because they know it helps to develop their region or their industry. And then the Skillnet network itself, the key, I suppose, aspect of what a Skillnet network does when it's hosted by an industry group is to bring in a management team who will work with that group of companies, who will sit down with SMEs or larger companies in some cases, and really work with them to identify their talent development needs. So some companies will struggle with that. They'll know that they have a problem, that they know that there's a gap, but they don't necessarily know the talent solution to it. So there's a diagnostic piece then that our network management teams will do when they go out to engage with companies. And once they do that diagnostic, then they're trying to identify, well, how is that need common between this business to this business over here and that business over there, so they can then go and develop a program offering that actually is going to be relevant to a group of companies. And a key part of the delivery model for any network is to deliver a set of training programs where not just one company is in attendance, but where staff from multiple companies are in attendance, because they're getting the benefit then not just of the expertise of the tutor or the facilitator or the lecturer, but they're getting the benefit of networking and exchanging knowledge with other people who are working in similar roles. And one of the things that's typically mentioned of the Skillnet network model and the questions that is asked of us, but will that be the case where you have companies, staff from different companies interacting? Does that not, provide a worry or concern from the point of view of competition and people not wanting to share what's happening within their business? Actually, what we find is that learners and companies are very open to this. They all have common talent challenges, and talent is almost like a neutral or shared area that they're happy to speak about openly, and therefore they're very happy to put their staff on programs with staff in similar roles in other organizations. And those member companies then, that grouping on the third side, they are typically a group who will participate in a network. They will put staff on training programs. It's typically pay as you go. So there are some Skillnet networks that offer membership fees where you could pay an annual membership and you get to participate in as many programs as you want. But in the main, our Skillnet networks will work on a pay as you go model. So every time a company wants to put its group of staff, 3 staff on a sterility program or whatever it might be, then it would identify the set fee for that. And because Skillnet Ireland is supporting that network from a funding perspective, this is a level of subsidy that's built into that, so that makes it more affordable for those businesses to participate. So I suppose what we're looking for from any company that's part of one of our Skillnet networks then is just that commitment to put staff on training programs. And we know that it's a challenge. Companies are struggling to get the day job done and release staff for training, and yet they need to release those staff for training because these are the key people who are going to be, developing the organization, growing the organization. They need to enhance their skills. It's a necessity. It's not a luxury. So the learners themselves, the vast majority of the 100,000 or so people we work with each year are people who are in employment. straddling all age groups. Typically, the majority of people that we support are in the 30 to 49 age range. So people who are in mid-career, maybe looking to take that step into more senior roles, maybe looking to pivot into other roles in their business, and they're working with their managers and so on to identify that the needs, their skills needs, as part of maybe a broader organizational analysis. And they're sitting down, they're undertaking those programs then through the network support. But then we also have a proportion of learners who are unemployed, people who are looking to kind of bridge back into the world of work. And we support about 2,000 or 3,000 people in that situation each year as well. And that's a key support. It's 100% funded by Skillnet Ireland. And it just gives people the opportunity who are maybe have previously worked in declining sectors to get into growth sectors in Ireland, the likes of offshore wind and so on. And then that last grouping is the trainers and the third parties. So working with, a really good group of higher education partners and institutions, of private sector trainers, of consultants and so on, who might be undertaking maybe evaluations of the work of the network, etc. So what do those networks do then? So they help the companies identify the talent gaps. They help them to source, relevant, flexible training solutions. They help them to save money because there's a subsidy built into this. But also the networks will coordinate the training programs on their behalf. They'll procure those training programs on their behalf. That's a huge advantage to companies over and above the subsidy, to actually somebody who would be taking over the heavy lifting of coordinating those training programs for organizations that may not have a HR department or may not have a learning and development department. That's a huge incentive and a huge benefit for them to do that. And look, there's an opportunity then for, excuse me, I just need to change one thing here. So there's an opportunity, of course, through all of that then for those companies to really develop their skills with that support of the network structure behind them. So look, I'm just going to jump into just two of the funding programs that we offer. And the core funding program to the groups of networks that we have support each year is called the Training Networks Program. And to that group of companies, we give them a 3-year profile of funding, and they will develop a strategy in terms of the broad challenges and opportunities that are within their sector and how they're going to address them. They will develop training plans, which they will submit to us each year with budgets. And there will be KPIs and targets built into that, of course, as you expect in the normal way where public funding is concerned. And of the overall budget that they would submit to us and apply for, we will fund up to 60% of that. And the rest has to come from the companies themselves through those contributions that they make towards the training fees that I mentioned. But they're also contributing towards the management costs of a Skillnet network. They're also contributing towards the overheads, etc. So it very much is, a public-private sector contribution. We'll also allow up to a quarter of an entire network's budget for the management costs. They can bring in a management team who can work with the companies, and about a third of their training budgets can be expended on in-company training. So this might be bringing an entire team or unit through a digitalization process within a company, where you just need to have a group of people from that one company together, and we facilitate that, but it's only a smaller proportion of their overall budget. So what happens through that broad training networks program then is in itself broad, because we deliver approximately 10,000 programs each year through the training networks program through our 70 Skillnet networks. And it's a mix of education training programs, it's a mix of mentoring and coaching support, online platforms, best practice visits, seminars, conferences, etc. So we really try and be open in as much as we can to the needs of companies and the way in which they want to upskill their staff. The few red lines for us are things like mandatory training. So if something is required by law in Ireland, we will not allow our Skillnet networks to support that. We believe that the grant that is given to us through the National Training Fund is best used on best practice training, on upskilling, etc., as opposed to mandatory training. And the profile of businesses that we support, again, it's very broad. There are very few limits or parameters that we set. Really, those companies have to be operating in the private or commercial semi-state sector in Ireland, and they must have a base in the Republic of Ireland. So over and above then the funding piece and the framework that I mentioned, within our organization, within Skillnet Ireland itself, we have a dedicated relation management structure through our business networks team. So we're working with each of those networks dotted throughout Ireland to make sure that they're delivering on their contracted targets with us, but also that we're supporting them wherever we can. We'll have a dedicated compliance and operational unit so that make sure that they're compliant with the terms of their agreements with us, and we'll provide, compliance visits and various other monitoring mechanisms that build in just to safeguard and protect our funds, because we're custodians of government funding, but also protect the reputation of those industry groups that we work with as well. And also there's a marketing and branding component to what we do. So across the 70 networks, then we're trying to amplify the overall impact that we make through our marketing comms function. But we would also support in that way our networks, because by building a strong Skillnet Ireland brand, we build a strong Skillnet brand as well for each of those 70 networks. And then maybe just the second way in which we support companies is not just for the delivery of programs, but it's where gaps are identified out there within Ireland, where maybe there's a program which just doesn't exist. It's not being delivered by a further higher education institution or by a private training provider. And in those cases, companies know that there's a need, but if you were to ask a senior HR person to say, well, you need to invest in the development of this program, you might be challenged to get a yes from that. So what we try and do is to try and jump in there as an intermediary body through our skill networks to say, well, actually, hold on. If a group of companies identify a need and they want to develop something, we can fund that, so and we try and build a premium into it where we fund it up to 80%. So you're still getting contribution from the private sector, but it just means that it's more feasible for those companies then to develop that new, postgraduate program or micro-credential or whatever it might happen to be. So I'll give you an example maybe of just one of our networks, Technology Ireland ICT Skillnet, working with technology companies across Ireland, but also with a much broader group of organizations now that have, a technology function. And it works very closely with further and higher education institutions in Ireland, like TU Dublin, the University of Limerick, National College of Ireland, Galway, etc. And through the development of partnerships with those universities, it has over the years developed over 10 master's degrees for the tech sector, including in the case of the Masters in Artificial Intelligence, which was first developed in 2018. It was at that point in time the first Masters in AI in Ireland. I think maybe also in Europe, but certainly in Ireland. So it's looking at the very specialist knowledge that's needed in those key areas, those advancing areas in technology, and has developed a suite of programs accordingly. And there's a significant body of work for that network now that it's working through those key education areas, working with the higher education institutions to convert a lot of those master's degrees into micro credentials so they can build towards the overall master's, but they still have a standalone value as well. And maybe just an example of one of our other networks then, First Polymer Training Skillnet, works in supporting the plastics industry in Ireland, which is a supplier to the medtech sector and the automotive industry and so on. Traditionally, people would have had to come in and do their full-time degree and, maybe postgraduate full-time. But through the Skillnet model, most of the programs that are delivered part-time. So it means that it can facilitate people who are working. And this particular network has developed an entire suite of programs then that can kind of build a parallel path up to, masters and more advanced programs, be it bespoke training programs, special purpose awards in polymer technology, a part-time bachelor engineering degree in polymer process engineering, etc. So it's just gives a different pathway for people into and through that particular industry. And that's just an example of one of many. But maybe if I take the same network, then it's not just about building educational pathways, it's about building career pathways. So they would work within the plastics industry and First Polymer Training Skillnet with a lot of technicians. And those individuals need to be converted over the years ahead to become automation technicians. But rather than having to go do a full-time program where they're taken off-site or out of the business to do that, this network has developed a number of kind of stepping stone programs, shorter, sharper programs that can be done at the time that suits the learners and the businesses themselves to convert into that automation technician role. And that stepping stone approach, again, is a key part of what networks try and do to try and facilitate upskilling, but trying to do it in the context of companies that still need to keep running and still need to keep, keep operating and keep thriving, but to allow the upskilling piece to be done in between all of that. So folks, just lastly then, just around the national initiatives, and I mentioned this, in Ireland, we have big challenges and opportunities around SME productivity, around climate, change and so on. So dedicated initiatives have been established by Skillnet Ireland working with the Irish government to address those challenges. So maybe if I take mentors work, for example, that was established back in 2020, was set up very quickly after COVID. And I was trying to make sure that SMEs had access to those kind of key skills through a mentor in the key areas of managing a small business. So whether it comes to finance, marketing, operations, strategy for the business, etc. And how that program is delivered is actually through a mentor-based model where they would work with a mentor over a 12-week period. They would develop a strategic plan for the business based on that mentoring experience that would be sense checked with the mentor, etc. Who's typically somebody who's worked in that industry and that area of work for many, many years. And it's an award-winning program in Ireland, and it's funded significantly by Skillnet Ireland. So there's just a small, contribution needed from SMEs who participate, and we've seen really strong uptake levels of that mentor program in Ireland. It really seems to be meeting a need, and the numbers participating in it are growing year on year. Maybe if I take maybe finally the Climate Ready Academy initiative that was first established going back to 2021, and the impetus for that, of course, was climate change. Us needing as a nation just to develop a more cohesive and a broader response to climate, and one that allows companies to kind of build up their expertise. So under the Climate Ready Academy, then, which is a set of training programs which go from basic knowledge and awareness around climate and what my company needs to do, right through to much more specialized programs in the transport sector and programs aimed at leaders in that space, energy efficiency, etc. So that again has been rolled out now over the last number of years, has gotten really, really good feedback. We're seeing lots of companies participating in it. And again, it's meeting a need, and an offering like that evolves over the years. So new programs are added under the Climate Ready Academy as new needs emerge in response to climate change. So I'm conscious, folks, that we're maybe coming up on the time. So if that's okay, I'm going to close the presentation at that and just give any colleagues an opportunity for Q&A at this point. And look, thank you very much for that. I hope that's been helpful.
Thank you so much, Dave, for the fantastic presentation. Our first question in the chat relates to the investment of 30 million euro, which is very impressive. What are the incentives for industry to invest? Are there tax breaks? And what led to that investment, and how might you encourage or sustain that, within Ireland, or maybe lessons for Canada?
Well, there are tax breaks actually, but it's interesting because one of the things that's actually been highlighted in the OECD's National Skills Strategy for Ireland is a reclaim facility. So, many countries have subsidised training programs, not dissimilar in terms of the subsidisation model to Skillnet Ireland, but maybe different in terms of the enterprise-driven approach to it. But Ireland doesn't have a reclaim facility. But we've been tasked by and trusted by the Irish government now to develop that facility. So in the next month or so, we're going to be launching a new initiative that will allow companies who are operating and being supported by our networks to actually reclaim salary costs and reclaim travel and subsistence costs. So that's a really real and significant advantage to those companies then. So they'll get access to the subsidized training, but also if they have to send staff on a 3-day training program, they will be able to kind of reclaim the equivalent costs back from salaries, etc. Because one of the key challenges that we hear consistently from companies who do not send their staff on training is that I couldn't afford it. I couldn't afford to take that person out of the business. And now there's a facility for them to be able to afford it. In terms of the core model and the subsidized model, there are no parallel incentives built into it. It really is just that reduced fee on the training program. But the other part is it's almost the intangible benefit, which is actually having the network manager who you can speak to. They're like a trusted advisor. These are people who typically have worked in the industry for years, but they know learning and development. But they're running the network and they're engaging with those companies frequently. They're being able to kind of distill that set of training needs, and they're taking on those needs on behalf of maybe typically a smaller business, but there are large businesses as well who get supported. And that coordinating role is a key one. So that's time that an SME owner manager doesn't have to spend doing that. And that to them, there's a very significant advantage in doing it. So we don't believe we'll need to increase our subsidy levels. We believe our subsidy levels are right when it's actually generating that much co-investment from the private sector. So it's an interesting model in different countries, of course. Maybe if something like Skillnet Ireland has been established for the first time, you might need to see a higher subsidy level than our core model, which is 60% from the Skillnet Ireland, 40% from the private sector. But having, I suppose, been established for a number of years and having a significant number of companies now operating and being part of each network, that's the right subsidy level for us at the moment. And a sustainable one, I should say. We don't expect that co-investment from the private sector to drop anytime soon. If anything, it should also increase.
Thank you so much, Dave. We had a question about your business model slide. And so one of our folks in the chat works with an EU research network with close links to the Trades Union and the Ideas Institute. So where might that fit into the business model? Would that be a steering committee or a member company, maybe a trainer or a third party?
Well, it's interesting actually that in terms of, let's say, Skillnet Ireland itself and the structure that I mentioned at the outset, that we have our own board, and that board is composed of ministerial nominees from employer organizations, but also employee organizations. So we have a number of trade union representatives who are actually represented on the board of Skillnet Ireland. So typically then maybe where there are training organizations affiliated to trade unions who are actually engaging in upskilling people within industries, that they would become a provider and one of many providers that our Skillnet networks would actually engage with. And then typically the process for any provider, whether it's a university or a private training institution, to engage is through procurement processes. So what would happen is that because we're a nimble and lean organization, we fund our networks and on a the 3-year basis that I mentioned and so on. But those applications and training plans will come into this each year. The set of needs that those companies will have will change each year. Therefore, each of our Skillnet networks, it has a management team, but it won't have a set of trainers as in employees. What it will do is it will procure its set of needs each year. So you might have a situation where maybe one year the Ideas Institute is not part of, would say, the training program being offered by a network, but the next year it is. The same with the University of Galway. It could be needed by a network one year, but maybe not the next, and so on. But as the needs of those companies change and evolve, that gets baked into the procurement exercises that each of our networks will undertake. And then everybody then will have an opportunity to bid for that work and be part of it.
Thank you, Dave. We had a question about the micro to masters relationship there. So what into setting up kind of developing micro credentials from master's programs, and what do you see as maybe the challenges or successes of that type of work?
Well, I think a number of our Skillnet networks actually have been very groundbreaking actually in their approach to establishing micro credentials. It's probably 5 years since Taste for Success. Skillnet first started to offer micro credentials, working with University College Cork in the southwest of Ireland in the food space, and badging those programs and so on. And then, of course, you have other networks who have well-established programs who see a need where their member companies are saying to them, look, we really want to have people who are qualified at this master's level, but just this idea of one big block program does not work for us anymore. So we need to see it in more bite-sized chunks. We need you to reconfigure programs so they can be offered in micro credentials, so a person can ultimately go towards that master's degree. But maybe not everybody will make that full journey, as it were, but yet they're going to receive so many micro credentials along the way that have a standalone value, because delivering a set of skills that actually are needed by those companies. So I suppose it's just again going back to that original ethos of the organization, being responsive to the needs of companies, and trying to make sure, I guess, that in the context of a challenge, that it can be accommodated. Because I think one of the challenges in Ireland, and maybe it's unique to Ireland, I'm not sure, but just around the development of micro credentials, which is what we hear back from some of the industries and business that we work with, is that they would say, well, actually, it takes as long for us to develop a micro credential as it does to develop a postgraduate program, because the validation processes in the higher education institutions are organized in such a way that you have to go through almost the exact same level of academic rigor, etc. And of course, we get the rigor part of it. That's entirely understandable. But I suppose one would expect a proportionality piece, sort of it's a more concentrated piece of work, and a more concentrated learning or set of learning outcomes, that it shouldn't take the same amount of legwork behind the scenes to get that accredited, etc. So that's just one of the challenges that we work through. But like any country, you'll have institutions that are more heavily geared towards industry, and we know that there's many education institutions in Ireland that are steeped actually in working with companies and try and work as proactively and as quickly as they can to develop those micro credentials. But that's just one of the challenges that we've experienced.
Thank you, Dave. Somebody asked about that distinction between the best practices training and mandatory training. So could you tell us a little bit more about that and why your focus is on the best practices training?
Yeah, so let me see. If we take maybe certain other countries, I'm aware that, for example, that in Italy, Italy operates a national training fund as well, so a levy on employers, and I think approximately then 1/3 of the money that's expended through that national training fund goes on mandatory training. So the likes of health and safety training, or if you're operating a forklift, a reach or counterbalance forklift license, etc. And I suppose we took a position, we were first established to say, well, actually, if we were to go to fund that activity, we could find that a huge section of our budget gets taken up with that. In other words, gets taken up with the type of training that companies have to do anyways. So I suppose we just made that hard choice back at the outset of Skillnet to say, no, look, we are not going to support that, but anything over and above that we can support. So if it's training to do with regulatory standards, that's absolutely permissible. If it's to do with a specialized area in AI, or in fish filleting, it can be anything, because we work with so many different sectors. Once it's upskilling those individuals and it's of support to the businesses, then that's absolutely possible through the network. It's just that mandatory training, the required by law piece, that's the only aspect of what is offered in Ireland that's out of scope from a Skillnet Ireland perspective. And I can't see us ever bringing that piece back in. I think from the assessments that are undertaken on our behalf. So we will commission typically economic consultants to evaluate the outputs of our programs. There's one being undertaken at the moment, and they're looking at the impact of all of our programs between 21, 22, and 23. And it's showing that over half of all of the businesses that have been supported by our networks have increased their digital technology usage, have become more productive as a result of being part of a Skillnet network. I don't think we'd see those types of returns if we allowed a significant amount of our budget to be expended on mandatory training. So I suppose that was for that reason, Michael, that we took that choice.
Thank you, Dave. Somebody asked about the role of not-for-profit organizations or the public sector, for example, municipalities, in upskilling and reskilling within your networks. How do they work with Skillnet Ireland?
They don't. It's the short answer. Again, this goes back to the mandate of Skillnet Ireland when we were first established. Our role is to support the private sector, and the government at the day, and government departments since, know that there are other opportunities for statutory bodies, for public bodies, etc., to avail of budgets that include an upskilling component, and that just allows us to actually focus our supports in the private sector. Now, having said that, there can be public bodies who participate on the steering groups of Skillnet networks, because maybe it could be a county council, for who is sitting on a chamber-based or regional Skillnet, and they're offering their perspective in terms of what's coming down the tracks from the point of view of the county or regional development piece. So they still have a key role to play in kind of the understanding the landscape and understanding what's coming down the tracks. But it's just their own staff could not participate or engage in the training. So it's typically at steering group level, Michael, that we would see that level of interaction with public bodies. And then obviously as providers to our networks, as I mentioned, the vast majority of the providers that we would work with are, public education institutions. Obviously, private trainers are an important component of it, but those bodies are a key part of the mix of provider partners that our networks would engage with as well.
Thank you, Dave. So Skillnet Ireland has been operating for over 2 decades, and the effort in Canada is much more nascent. What advice would you have for those of us who are working in the plus skilling, upskilling, reskilling space?
Well, I think for me, it's that engagement with industry is so important. And it's not that the learner voice is lost in this mix, because the people who are participating in Skillnet programs are workers, they're learners, they have a voice, they want to go on programs, they're talking to their managers and supervisors around the training they want to do. So not to underplay the importance of learners at all, but that industry engagement bit is key. And I know many of, I'm sure, the education institutions, Michael, that are part of eCampus Ontario have very strong industry links. You might have some who have strong industry links, but it tends to be with larger corporations, and they're doing very bespoke pieces of work potentially on their behalf. I think where you win the watch is in developing models of engaging smaller groups or groups of small companies. I think if you have a cohesive model where you can bring those groups of bodies to companies together as a group, and connect that group of small companies then with the higher education institutions and post-secondary providers in that region, well, then that's a very powerful collaboration right there. So it's just looking at the mechanisms by which you do that. But I think that's a powerful piece, because I'm sure, not unlike Ireland, I'm sure huge level of productivity and a huge level of employment in Ontario is also driven by SMEs, by those small and medium-sized enterprises.
Thank you, Dave. That's a fantastic note to end on. And we thank you for your time and generosity with your insights in this webinar, and for the great questions that folks have contributed in the chat. So please join me in thanking Dave for the session. And if you'd like to watch this webinar back, this will be posted on our YouTube channel in early April. So thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody, for the questions.